Hunting, diving, and camping. Whatever you like to do when you take it outside. Spend your afternoons with me, Misty Wells, Friday, 5 o'clock, right here on the Tan Talk Radio Network.
Hello there, Tampa Bay. This is former NFL and college football coach Jimmy Johnson. Listen to the Kelly Show every Monday starting at 5 p.m. They can sure use the attention.
And this is former Major League Baseball player, Hall of Famer Wade Boggs. I also hope you listen to the Kelly Show every Monday starting at 5 p.m. They can darn sure use the money.
Hi there. This is marine wildlife artist and conservationist Dr. Guy Harvey. Please listen to the Kelly Show every Monday starting at 5 p.m. They need to feel worthy.
If you would like to become a wholesale buyer of the premium quality longevity product that you hear about right here on the Tan Talk Radio Network for personal service, you can pick up the phone right now and call Lola at 727-441-3311. Again, that's Lola at 727-441-3311. Or for even faster service, log on to tantalkhealth.com. That's tantalkhealth.com. Here's to your health and longevity.
Tom O'Brien is on the Tan Talk Radio Network. Every Monday through Friday from 4 till 5 p.m., Tom takes to the airwaves as he breaks down the day's market action. Tom combines his technical knowledge of the markets with his years of trading experience to take your calls and questions every market day from 4 to 5 p.m. Whether you're new to trading or an active day trader, don't miss out on the Tom O'Brien Show live on the Tan Talk Radio Network from 4 to 5 p.m. Monday through Friday.
Live in a condo or homeowners association? Do you have issues? How about questions? Tune in to the Ameritech Connection every Thursday at 5 p.m. on Tan Talk Radio Network. That's 1340 AM and 106.1 FM. Right, Sharon?
That's right, Mike. We cover it all when it comes to deed-restricted communities. We have the answers to all of your questions and more on the Ameritech Connection every Thursday at 5 p.m. on Tan Talk Radio Network, 1340 AM and 106.1 FM.
Hi, I'm Dawn Reese. Expedia Cruise Ship Centers everywhere under the sun sail. Choose your paradise soaking in the sun and setting your watch to the gentle rhythm of the surf. Yes, your tropical cruise could be just around the corner. Book yours now with Expedia Cruise with Dawn Reese. Free drinks, free gratitudes, $350 credit, specialty dining, $750 in savings, reduced deposit, and you can call now, 727-871-7788, as I'm your vacation consultant and look forward to working with you.
This is the Tan Talk Radio Network.
Does America really want to become a Christian theocracy? Let's talk about that right now here on the Atheist Forum. You are about to enter the no superstition zone of rational thinking and intellectual curiosity here on the Atheist Forum. Standing by for your questions or comments at 727-441-3000, where you can talk to a real live atheist here on Tan Talk 1340. This is the voice of atheism in Florida. Our website, talk.aof.ngo, and your opportunity to insult the atheist of your choice for only $2 here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. Callers can receive their very own Get Out of Hell free card by dialing 441-3000. We'll fix you up with that and some other things. Ed Golly with Jim Peterson and Joe Reinhardt in the Tan Talk studios talking about the fact that no matter what anybody tells you, the United States is, by constitutional definition, a secular nation led by a secular government. But conservatives want to convert it to a Christian theocracy, and we're seeing that effort underway in the Kavanaugh nomination going on as the drama unfolds this week in Washington. Their efforts being led also by Vice President Mike Pence, with assistance from Betsy DeVos and former EPA Director Scott Pruitt, who seek to dismantle from within the departments that exist for our education and environmental protection. Well, as the Supreme Court becomes increasingly conservative, it really is conceivable that if conservatives retain control of Congress next month, we could see them seize what could be a once-in-a-lifetime lifetime opportunity to move this nation in the direction of a theocracy, which they've been trying to do for pretty much since the end of the Second World War, I'd say.
Civil War.
Revolution. Right, yeah. But I think we saw the real foundation get laid after in the Eisenhower administration when the Pledge of Allegiance was converted to a prayer. McCarthy's scare that defined our nation as the Christian nation, and the capitalist system, the good system, and the communists were the evil atheists, and so that clearly delineated the difference between the two without really needing to evaluate the economic system difference. Anyway, if you think this is such a great idea, we wonder if you've really thought this through as thoroughly as you should have, because we're going to talk today about what this country might be like if it really did start to become a Christian nation, if we really did pull that first sentence out of the very first one of the Bill of Rights that says that Congress will make no law respecting an establishment of religion or doing anything to interfere with a citizen's freedom to engage in any religion that they want. Congress will not take a position with respect to religion in America.
I think you're right that at least in terms of the de facto religions of the country, they are gradually declining as secular affiliation, that is, people who say that they do not belong to any religion, continues to increase. We now number somewhere in excess of 30% of the population of secularly oriented people. And this seems to inspire large numbers of the religiously oriented to take an increasingly more intensive position toward religious hegemony, which means the predominance of one particular religion over not only all the others, but of society in totality.
Well, religion in this country is $1 trillion a year cash cow. You can see where the competition for that could get pretty keen.
It could indeed.
So that leads to the question, who would be charged with interpreting Christian law?
Well,
in a theocracy.
Typically, these kinds of issues are settled, particularly if it's a close call or if the sides are dedicated and devoted to their sides. It's settled by who owns the most guns or who has the biggest army or what have you. You know, there are 35,000 different denominations, Christian denominations, at the moment, so I can see where the elbowing to get up to the public trough could get pretty intense, but typically I think these matters have been settled by covenant. God gave the land of milk and honey to the Jews, and all they had to do was show up there and kill the 20, 30, 40 million people that already lived there, and it was all theirs. Unfortunately, one man's covenant is as good as the next, just like one man's revelation. And if, for instance, I happen to feel strongly that I have a covenant that entitles me to your house, and I'll be able to murder you and your family without any thought of retribution or punishment or consequences to myself, because I have a covenant with the Almighty to own this property. I don't know whatever happened to deeds, but when we're dealing with people who believe in covenants and who think that they are, by virtue of the Almighty, entitled to Israel or your house or wherever it is, the consequences of that consequences are severe, and the solutions are very, very limited.
Well, you're listening to the Atheist Forum here on the Tan Talk Radio Network, and we are contemplating what this country might be like if it started to evolve into a theocracy, and we welcome your opinion on that subject to 441-3000. Give us a call, tell us whether you think this is a good idea or a bad idea and why. But I think we're seeing the first steps in that direction taken, because control of the courts allows the judiciary to interpret the Constitution any way they want, including interpreting the First Amendment as not meaning that we cannot declare this country a Christian nation, right?
Antonin Scalia said as much, or intimated as much, in at least one interview that I read, of course, during his lifetime. Sorry to see him go so late.
Well, the current administration is, by every indication, very friendly to the notion, particularly our august Vice President, Mr. Pence. And he has declared himself in the past to be very favorable toward Christian dominionism, which is a movement within fundamentalist sects to declare that the United States is a Christian nation, and that this particular group, is the very embodiment of what that means. And so they are a very ambitious group, and they're highly motivated, and they're in a position of power. And all this coming together.
And wealth.
Yes, and wealth. And all this coming together is particularly alarming, I think.
Particularly since the idea, as they propose it, is that somehow the secularists, the humanists among us have stolen this from them. That this country was founded as a Christian country, that God intended it to be a certain way, that the more we deviate from God's plan, the more we'll bring about punishment and hardships upon ourselves, and blah, 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 blah.
Even though they assert this on no foundation whatsoever, none of our founding documents even refers to God. Look through the Constitution, God is not mentioned. And there's no God mentioned in the Declaration of Independence either. There's a Creator mentioned, which is kind of a de facto recognition of
it's just pretty generic.
Very, very generic.
As deities go.
Well, when groping for any evidence, that's what the conservatives come up with typically, even though this was simply a letter to a king explaining why these people thought they didn't want to be involved.
Before the Bill of Rights.
Exactly, because no law is ever adjudicated or based on anything that's in the Declaration of Independence. It has nothing to do with what our laws are structured on. And
it's the Constitution that's the basis.
I think that when we end up with a Supreme Court that is maybe, 6-3 conservative, very strongly conservative, they're going to start chipping away at the issues that they think represent Christian values. So one of the first things they'll do is overturn Roe Wade, toss it back to the states. All the flyover states will immediately make it illegal. And then they will attempt to, I think, put Planned Parenthood out of business through legislation, through regulation, by imposing on them such absurd regulations that they can't really remain functional, except maybe in blue states or Canada, of course, which isn't a state, but I mean that's where people need to go. Well, of course, the poor people can't afford to go out of state.
That's right.
To get these services, and so they will simply need to do without. And at the same time, they'll be telling them no more welfare, no more Section 8 housing, no more food stamps, no more free lunch programs. You're on your own.
Unlimited supply of angry, unwanted children.
It's interesting that I don't think, we talked earlier, Joe, I believe you mentioned that's something about armed revolt. But I don't think they need to resort to armed revolt if they have full control of the political apparatus. And moreover, thanks to the lax gun laws they do in fact have an army.
Now, my point is that they don't need armed revolt to take over. My point is that once they do take over, it will lead to armed revolt because there are so many intractable factions involved. And again, people who operate on covenants and people who think that they have some direct pipeline to the Almighty. And even if they don't think that, they want you to think that. And if they have to use a gun to help out with that. And so the question of who would interpret these laws, well, that's an easy question to answer.
Yes, it's not
the answer is nobody. Look at the last 2,000 years and the number of religious wars we've had, most of which were involved, well, how should we interpret these laws? So the answer is there's a revolution, an insurrection, and an endless civil war among countless intractable non-negotiable factions who won't back up an inch because they got God on their side.
But implicit in all that is the fact that, as you say, the struggles will take place among different similar groups contending for power. Which one is going to be the dominant one? The most oppressed, the poor people, the vast majority of people, will not have access to the means of conducting any such sort of insurrection.
They'll have to content themselves with enjoying the crossfire.
Yes. Make them very cross indeed.
Well, I think also then the next step would be for the courts to chip away at our education system by essentially moving the public education system into one that's privatized, run by the churches, all with taxpayer support, all without any kind of curriculum regulation or teacher regulations. So
that agenda they've been pursuing at time and a half.
Mm-hmm. Right, which started actually with Jeb Bush's governorship, as he's yeah, and this would become essentially a federal movement to really leave just a shell of the public school system as a dumping ground for the unwanted students, while all the others would go to the Christian schools, learning that science is just something people make up, that if the Bible disagrees with the science, you reject the science and accept what it says in the Bible about things like evolution, creationism.
You have to change the fact.
Yes. I also think you might have mandatory patriotism, right? You see a lot of these conservatives so upset with football players who won't stand for the national anthem, and that the football players who had committed rape or assault, sexual assault, or wife beaters, eventually come back in. There's no objection to them being there. They come back in to play. So I can see that you might start seeing state or even federal laws that actually mandate that you will stand, you will participate in prayer during these exercises, whether it's the national anthem or some kind of a state-issued prayer that would be mandatory attendance.
But perhaps it's not really patriotism, but a faux patriotism. And what they're really advocating is a mandatory conformity to the rules and regulations laid down by our betters.
They understand that loyalty can't be commanded, but they don't understand that fully. I mean, they do think that it can be at least garnered by force of arms and by threat of force. So it really is a matter of demanding the people think the way you want them to think, or else, which, by the way, has great religious basis, because if you don't think the way that God wants you to think, He's got a little eternal fire in store for you, which is a hell of a price to pay for what amounts to a difference of opinion.
Sure, well, that's the whole foundation of the faith-based institutions, that one should be proud to consider themselves a member of the flock.
Right. But there's something positive about worship, that groveling is dignified. It's good for you.
People speak with great pride about being a person of deep religious faith, which simply means if you have faith, you have no evidence. Why are you proud of believing something for which you have no evidence?
In other words, conforming.
Because there's no virtue in believing anything that can be easily believed.
Oh, okay.
I have one more note here, and that is that you can't coerce patriotism. If you love your country as you love a person very close to you, and it means something, and you do it freely. And you can't do it freely if somebody is pointing a gun at you or finding other ways to coerce you to say things that are empty, vacuous phrases, like, say, the Pledge of Allegiance, modified to suit certain parties, but nevertheless, people who really genuinely feel a love for their country will not subscribe to this, and they will become they will become the opposition.
I know there are thousands upon thousands of children who grew up thinking that they were pledging allegiance to the Republic for Richard Sands.
Well, our man-child president has asserted that a football player doesn't stand for the... he should be fired. Well, I would argue that the football player is the more patriotic individual because he wants to see change in the country to the extent that he and his fellow black people, his family, will not be persecuted by the police, which is what his kneeling represents.
So for the love of his country, he is willing to put his personal well-being on the line to go out there and take a public position and be exposed to the kinds of yes,
costing his job in this case.
Right, and he's willing to risk it to try to make his country better. That's really what a patriot is, in my opinion.
Trump is sort of like
somebody gets fired because they don't conform to what somebody else thinks is the norm that everyone should conform to.
Trump is sort of like your grandfather or uncle who's just gone totally crazy from watching too much Fox News. He's basically been radicalized in the same sense that Arab Muslim assassins, etc., become radicalized by radical Muslims. He's become radicalized by Fox News and the Rush lynching mob and the hate radio in general. And there's a large segment of our population that is becoming or has been radicalized in just that form, and they're the people we need to be concerned about, not Mohammed. He can only do us a minimum amount of damage compared to what these guys can do.
Then I think once this movement would start against so-called unpatriotic athletes, then it can move on to unpatriotic atheists, right? So what do you think could be some of the possible consequences for some of these, what did you say, 36% of the population that
re-education camps, prison?
It's been done before. And not to atheists necessarily, although historically atheists have always been subjected to some fairly nasty treatment by the quote authorities unquote.
They've been hard to round out because you can't tell it by looking at them.
No.
They're a lot harder to persecute than Jews or blacks or people.
But both our state and federal constitutions assert that no religious test can ever be given for public service or to serve on a jury. Can you see the prospect of that being reversed to where anybody who wants to serve on a jury or be a judge or run for political office must profess belief in a Christian God? And of course, Muslims need not apply.
There are a number of states that have that proviso in their constitution right this minute. They can't enforce it anymore because of the U.S. Supreme Court. But again, that could be reversed.
Exactly.
So, there should be no religious test except you have to believe in some supreme being. Mm-hmm. So, David Koresh is okay, or Whirling Dervish. Hey, we'd like to hear from you, but Richard Dawkins, why don't you just shut up and leave us alone?
Mm-hmm. But Ed, what you're saying really implies that the Constitution will need to be overthrown, will be revised in some way to accommodate these.
What I'm saying is a Supreme Court that leans heavily to the right simply interprets it that way, and that's the end of the discussion. Our interpretation of what this means is that, yes, you can impose these Christian ideals on your population.
They're really going to have to stress out a bit to interpret such plain language as there shall be no religious test of political office and other things, or the First Amendment and so on. That's pretty well established not only in the not only in the law, but also in the traditions of the country. Everybody knows about that.
If you read many of their decisions, like Plessy versus Ferguson, you can see them twisting their brains into pretzels to arrive at the desired conclusion. There's no reason that they couldn't do that. And if you can't lie for Jesus, who can you lie for?
I mean, is it any different than what happened back in, I believe, 1963 with the 8-1 decision by the court that mandatory prayer exercises in public schools were unconstitutional? Well, schools in Texas were always, and probably I think maybe Louisiana and a lot of these southern states always had prayer exercises before the football games, and they had prayers given over the intercom. They just went ahead and continued to do it anyway. And what parent is going to object? Whoever did, they'd be burned out of the town, right?
Yeah.
So with no objection, they just went ahead and did it. So you could have this situation occur where you could have a religious test, and who's going to object? And even if you do, the court's going to rule against you. They'll find some way to say you don't have standing to sue. And
just last week, we talked to David Williamson about prayer on the public PA before a football game in a public school.
Religious will always find a way. You know, they're always pressing.
Well, they're commanded by the Almighty Himself to go forth and bring everyone into the fold. I mean,
this is what they believe.
I mean, that's how the court would then interpret it. A right-leaning court would say, if the prayers cannot be given over the public address system, whether it's in the classrooms or at the football stadium, it is somehow imposing restrictions on your freedom of religion, which comes right out of the First Amendment, right? It won't establish religion, but it won't prohibit the free exercise of it. So the court's going to say, well, this is your right to exercise it freely by imposing it on everybody, and if you don't like it, just stand there and politely and obediently and respectfully, don't object and listen.
Certainly you have a right to implore the Almighty to make your side prevail in the upcoming sporting event. I mean, look at the American.
We are listening to the Atheist Forum here on the Tan Talk Radio Network, and you're welcome to call in and give us your opinion about the prospect of a Christian theocracy in America at 441-3000. We're going to take a short break, very short, to tell you a little bit about Atheists of Florida, and then we'll continue here on WTAN.
Atheists of Florida is a nonprofit membership organization founded in 1992. For over 25 years, Atheists of Florida has brought atheists together to address state-church separation issues, provide legal assistance in cases of religious discrimination in employment or educational institutions, help atheists meet others who want to live their lives free of religion, and produce the Atheist Forum. For membership information, visit our website at atheistofflorida.com, where you'll find our newsletters, annual reports, statement of purpose, and information about meetings and events. That's atheistofflorida.com.
Earlier this week, the Trump administration announced it will no longer issue family visas to same-sex domestic partners of foreign diplomats or employees of international organizations who work in the United States. In 2015, the Supreme Court ruled by a razor-thin margin of 5-4 that same-sex marriage was a nationwide right. Is that another issue that could be reversed by a heavily right-leaning court that doesn't really care as much about civil liberties as it does about Christianizing America? That's what we're talking about today on the Atheist Forum. If you'd like to give us your opinion, 441-3000, we'll get you through to the program, and we'd love to hear from you, whether you agree or disagree.
I do think this is an issue that the Supreme Court and the courts in general can solve, and if you've got 20 or 30 years, we'll make sure that it gets done right. And a couple of $1 million.
Well, now, what we've been talking about a pretty sad state of affairs in regard to our country and to the present trends that we see playing out in the political sphere. But it seems to me that we also need to consider what we need to do to prevent such a thing from ever coming to fruition. And the first thought that occurs to me is that despite all these various factions contending with each other over who's going to have power and trying to reinforce or enforce their belief system on the public in general, what are we going to do about it? The first thing I think of is it's up to you. That is, you, the listener, the person who's on the other end of our broadcast here. And because unless you go out and participate and make our constitutional democracy a reality, then it does court the possibility of falling into some form of tyranny. And we see the beginnings of that now. But just like Smokey the Bear says, only you can prevent theocracy.
Jim, it may very well be that we're simply overstating our position and our strengths. And it may very well be that the believers in this country have the majority, have an unbeatable majority, and the more we urge people to go out and become active and vote for what they believe in, and the more we are self-defeating, because the people who get up off their butt and go to the polls are supporters of the exact people that we want to see go away.
Well, I'd like to think that the listeners to this broadcast, at least, might have a little different view. Mm-hmm. And it only takes...
And if they don't, I hope they soon do.
But remember, most of the great things that have happened historically, the American Revolution, the French, the Russian, anything which happens which has been viewed as a milestone of human freedom and additional capacity and so forth is always the product of a few people.
That's right.
Usually it starts with just one person.
You have to drag everybody right in the way.
That's right, yeah. So,
and this tide has been effectively stemmed for as long as my lifetime in this country by the legislatures and by the administrators. We had the Solid South, we had the Dixiecrats, and so they were able to stave off for decades integration until the courts won that battle. Mm-hmm. They were able to make it impossible to have freedom of choice, having to do with your reproductive rights, until the courts won that battle. They were able to impose upon the secular population, whether they were the minority or not, religious rituals in our schools and in our national anthem and our national prayer, as Ed likes to call it. So the point is that the courts have been the one relief valve to let off the steam of pitchforks and torches and bombs and assassinations that come with unhappy populace. And it looks as if, no matter what happens tomorrow, that they are on the verge of shutting off the safety valve, that all we have to do is wait around and see how much steam we can actually create.
Well, things are coming to a head, so to speak.
If we don't blow the head right off.
Our full head of steam, that is.
Of course, we already hear a lot of people proclaim that we were founded as a Christian nation, that Christian principles were the basis of our Constitution and our liberties and our democracy and our rights to own guns. We all know better than that, but those same people would also probably argue that the Ten Commandments, 8 of which are actually restrictions, should somehow be incorporated into law, which if you really sit and look at them, read them, you realize it'd be nearly impossible to implement any of them as laws with the kind of punishment prescribed for in the Bible, most of which is capital punishment. It's fascinating to me that there's a commandment that says you can't make a graven image, but there's no commandment that says you can't enslave another person. Right? Somehow this graven image is whatever the heck that is more offensive to the God than enslaving people.
Well, that's because the graven image is a competitor.
Continue.
whereas slaves are no competition to nobody.
Slavery was a common practice throughout the ancient
business too. You don't want to ruffle the folks that are paying the bills.
It was 40 years ago that mass murder-suicide of members of the California-based People's Temples cult at the behest of their charismatic but paranoid leader Jim Jones in Jonestown Agricultural Commune in Guyana. The death toll exceeded 900 people. And it was, I think some 300 of them were age 17 and under, making the incident one of the largest mass murders in American history, except that it didn't happen on American soil, curiously, but pretty much everybody there
managed to kill a U.S. representative.
Yes, yes, they did. I think his name was. It happened in Guyana, in South America. Yeah.
But, I've heard people respond to the issue of something like prayer in school. What's wrong with prayer in school? And their response is, well, it doesn't hurt anyone. It doesn't hurt kids to make them pray, so just go ahead and do it. But look what happened to these 900 people who were convinced from birth, they were trained from birth, they were conditioned from birth to think that they should belong to some kind of a church, that they should go and listen to some kind of a charismatic, principled leader of their thoughts, their morality, their direction in life. And look where he led them. Ask any of them if they think religion hurt them. You can't, because they're dead.
No, but prayer in school, I see it as it's like a gateway drug.
Yeah, well, we're not suggesting that the slightest prayer is going to end up with a Jim Jones result, but however, it is the pathway, the initiating pathway into such a situation, and we do have to exercise caution and prudence when it comes to what sort of things that we allow. That's why the Constitution is pretty definitive about what can be said, and it urges a strict neutrality in terms of religion at all times and with all government agencies, including schools. That seems quite reasonable. Those who argue it doesn't hurt should also be amenable to the suggestion that it does no good either. So
that puts us in a situation where the best you can hope for is to break even.
Yes.
A, you lose, B, you break even. Let's gamble on that for a while.
Or C, let's do nothing. Just ignore the whole thing.
And it really was a fascinating event, and it just incomprehensible to me that so many people could have been so misled by one lunatic. And then, of course, I look at the White House today and I think, well, now, wait a minute. This is the same thing. It's just on a larger scale, right? I wonder, too, if you'd weigh in on the idea that the reason the president is so forcefully supporting his nomination is because this particular judge has expressed his opinion that a sitting president should not be subjected to any kind of criminal indictment while sitting. And we saw the article come out from the New York Times about the tax fraud that the Trump family's been involved in. Of course, explains why Trump will never release his tax returns, contrary to his promise. He wants judges on that court that are going to say, yeah, as long as you're a sitting president, or come to think of it, even if you're a retired president, you can't be bothered by matters legal.
Well, it seems highly unlikely that the person who proposed the president candidate for the Supreme Court would have any such thought in mind. I'm sure he's just doing it all for the good of the country.
Well, there's so many people that could take Kavanaugh's place and have far less baggage and would bring about far less difficulty in getting them confirmed. But the reason that Trump is stuck with Brett Kavanaugh is because Trump is a jerk. He cannot stand to lose. He is a child emotionally, and he is brain stupid.
I think anybody that demonstrates the level of narcissism that he does is demonstrating a very serious mental imbalance that convinces him that, he's the greatest person that ever existed, the healthiest person. He's so damn healthy, how come he didn't serve in the war? He had those bone spurs that had to be cured by playing copious rounds of golf. Right? And seems to work. Yeah. And he's able to delude himself into thinking he's a self-made billionaire. So then he deludes others into believing it, and even when the evidence comes forward that he is not anywhere near what he claims to be as a businessman.
He's lost track. He's lost the ability to distinguish fact from fiction.
I think you're right. It is in his mind, whatever he says it is, because it should be that.
It isn't something that he does consciously anymore. He's done it so often, it's like riding a bicycle.
It's not even Trump anymore. It's the people who follow him.
Right.
The people who
exactly right.
believe what he tells them to believe. And I think it's traceable to a quirk in human psychology, where once people have committed to a certain kind of leadership or a certain kind of rule or law or whatever, they are very reluctant to become uncommitted to it.
It saves them the onus of thought.
Mm-hmm. And what you
I don't have to think as long as you tell me what to do. Shut up. It's your turn.
But what you've done is simultaneously describe religion. That's exactly what a religion does, right? It fills you with these concepts of eternal life and eternal justice, so that even when the evidence becomes very clear that these things are all nothing more than Bronze Age mythologies passed down from generation to generation, there is still an unquenchable desire to subscribe to them and believe them no matter what.
Otherwise, it becomes evident that there's something wrong with you.
And it's not just confined to religion. It really is something that is applicable in every area of life. In Pinellas County, for instance, we had a number of cases of measles. I think about 12 or 14 cases of measles broke out because people refused to get vaccinated against them. And they do so on the basis of a entirely incorrect idea about the nature of vaccines. And they're fearful about it because they've seen articles on the internet from celebrities. And so consequently, it's going to lead to a situation where we all become exposed to the possibility of measles and other serious diseases, and especially children. And it's all based on this little quirk. And what do we do about it? That's the real question. How do we help people overcome this tendency?
Well, it's proven very difficult to totally eradicate because they made it mandatory that you have certain shots and et cetera in order to enter school, public or private. And then people simply just homeschool the children. I mean, they felt that strongly about it.
But what I mean is the way of thinking that says, well, I heard reports that there are aliens and flying saucers, and I heard reports that the drinking water is full of fluoride and it's bad for you.
Yeah, the conspiracy crowd.
That's right, and it's about so many things that you encounter in everyday life, and it's simply all a product of this peculiar quirk of human growth and personality. So my question is, what do we do about it? How do we help people develop different ways of thinking?
Joe, you have a quote for us, and then we're going to talk about some black-collar crimes here in Florida.
Today's quote from Maya Angelou: "People will forget what you said. People will forget what you did. But people will not forget how you made them feel." Are you listening to me, Bert Kavanaugh?
In the week since, a grand jury in Pennsylvania indicted more than 300 Catholic priests. At least 15 people have filed complaints with the Attorney General's office here in Florida, alleging a church cover-up of child sexual abuse in our state. Here's what Pam Bondi said. 12 to 20 victims have come forward in Florida just by hearing what happened in Pennsylvania. Any priest, I'm still quoting Bondi, any priest that would exploit a position of power and trust to abuse a child is a disgrace to the church and a threat to society, unquote.
Hard to argue with that.
Yes, isn't it?
That's so rare to agree with her. Feels good.
Well, regrettably, for the church, this didn't come forward about 4 years ago when Bondi was running for re-election, because undoubtedly a handsome or substantial donation to her re-election campaign fund would have squelched any investigation into that, as we saw that she sold out to Donald Trump with his Trump view that defrauded people.
That's worked for her every other time.
Yeah, so now there's just no re-election campaign to donate to, so they're going to have trouble figuring out how to buy her off. But we do know she's for sale. She's made that quite clear. Our area is no stranger to these crimes. From 1996 to 2006, under Bishop Robert Lynch, the diocese paid nearly $3 million in settlements to people who were abused by church representatives.
This is a crime not only against the victims, but against the people in the pews who faithfully contributed their money, big wads of money, and were urged to consider the state of their soul.
A lot of that money was paid by the church's insurance companies as well, but
they have rates, though.
Again, it bothers me that they are paying off people with funds that they acquired tax-free, which means that I'm helping the Catholic Church to buy its way out of what ought to earn them far more culpability than they've seen so far.
But don't you think the underlying symptom, again, is the trust that the church instills in people? That we are the representatives of this God that only for him you wouldn't even be here, right? He is the reason you're, yes, and we have all the answers, we have all the knowledge, we have the direct pipeline to the God. So we are somehow elevated in our status in the society and certainly in the church.
They literally contend that they have the keys to heaven. Okay.
Somebody should find that pipeline and give it a good inspection.
And they're able to take advantage of that to abuse children, keep them quiet, and of course, and then it becomes a self-perpetuating situation that they presume would never be, pardon the expression, exposed, because the church is not subject to any kind of examination by the government. Right? They keep themselves completely separate in their finances and even in in their dealings with the parishioners. Fortunately, we're getting past that, but for all time prior to that, the church was completely immune from any kind of supervision by the government, regulation, or reporting to them.
And with the, I can't think of a better word than atrocities coming to light on a daily basis, with something as severe as, again, abusing underage children. One has to wonder if they had no compunction about that and engaged in it on a wholesale volume. What else have they been up to? I mean, I know for a fact that they pad their monetary stock portfolios and don't pay taxes on it, that they have huge rental properties, hospitals, schools, all of which it allows them to suck at the public trough.
And don't you think that can be exacerbated and expanded upon by a right-leaning court?
And improved upon, if nothing else, as far as they're concerned. And one of your questions that you've posed several times, and what can we do about these sort of things? And then is take away their tax exemption. Take away their tax exemption.
Yes.
Let them pay taxes like any ordinary criminal.
Instead, it's going to be the opposite. They're going to be drawing funds out of the tax coffers for their education systems, as the public school is systematically dismantled and watered down to the point of being essentially a useless commodity.
The assault on our schools is, again, a well-organized assault. It's been going on now for decades that I can see, and of course, you get a little double bonus because you get rid of all those troublesome unions at the same time.
Yeah, that's right.
In their defense, and I have to be the devil's advocate here, I should say that there's absolutely no evidence that I'm aware of that the bingo games are fixed.
Thank you, Jim.
That's the least I can do.
The reason for that is that they're fixed going in, because you can make any payout that you want, so the house percentage is whatever you deem it to be. So the fix is
Giving away the game.
the fix is in for the house, and they're not doing any fix for the players.
I'm deeply disappointed now.
Well, the vote on Kavanaugh will be tomorrow, Saturday. I think, though, that even if he is rejected, the replacement nomination will be just as bad. He might have come up with a female judge who is very strongly religious, who then wouldn't offer any risk of
Judge Janine from Fox News is.
That's right.
Actually, she was cited at one point.
She was open for the.
So there'd be no risk of Kavanaghistic history of any kind of probably heavy drinking or sexual abuse or something.
Have you ever seen this
like
woman in
that.
action, Judge Janine?
No.
I've seen it from time to time.
YouTube her. She is for Fox News. She makes the rest of the folks at Fox News look normal. She goes right off the scale. She ought to be. I was watching a show the other night, and the girl says, I can almost feel her spit coming through the screen when she talks.
Actually, she reminds me of a couple of nuns I had interactions with.
You hear all the time that these appointments on the Supreme Court are for life, but most judges actually do retire. They don't stay on until they drop dead. One example is Judge Paul Stevens, who had initially endorsed Kavanaugh based on his judicial rulings, and now has changed his opinion about that and come out in opposition of him because of his demeanor at the hearings. But my point is that we don't necessarily need to wait for all these judges to die before another opening comes. Well, Anthony Kennedy didn't die. He retired, and that's why Kavanaugh is being considered for the seat. So over the next 2 years, we very likely will have other retirements or deaths. And certainly over the next 6 years, other judges will step down, leaving the court open to
8-1, 8-2.
Well, exactly.
7-2 conservatives. Oh man!
Think of the destruction they could do to our protections from the religious right imposing its ideals on all of us.
Social Security, Medicare, all the social programs, the entire New Deal. Everything.
Immigration?
These people, this is nothing new. They've been foaming at the mouth for this going back to Franklin Roosevelt.
That's right.
His neighbor didn't even live next to him in Hyde Park. He moved away for the entire time he was in office. And most Republicans wouldn't call him Roosevelt. They only referred to him as that man.
Wow. And yet try to take away Social Security today from the people, the recipients of it, will come after you.
Well, they're going to need to do that in order to help to pay off all these tax cuts that we just mentioned.
Trillions of dollars. In fact, buried in the news about Kavanaugh was an article I saw that the Congress had passed another $3 trillion tax cut, or at least had advanced it.
Yeah, our debt has gone up over $1.1 trillion since the anti-debt people took office.
It's unbelievable.
I think they'll start with veterans benefits. They'll be watered down progressively. They've always back to the end of the First World War when they marched on Washington.
Yeah.
And then it'll go on to, like you said, Social Security, Medicare benefits, Medicaid. So that we'll start to look more and more like, say, Cuba just before the revolution or so, right?
I'm looking forward to the return of poor farms and Florence Clinton. I'm looking forward to the good old days.
I don't know why I'm laughing. I brought all this up.
Well, you didn't have to worry about your grandparents. You just put them outside at night and left them there. Goodness.
It'll be hard to find a suitable.
Everything.
It'll be hard to find a suitable iceberg, though, anymore. With the climate change, which is another thing they're not addressing, which probably is the most important single issue that has to do with the future of mankind.
You just turn off the lights and wait.
Essentially,
it itself.
Next week on the Atheist Forum, we'll be welcoming our guest Seth Andrews, the self-proclaimed thinking atheist. Jimmy, can you tell me just a little bit about him?
Well, just a little bit. I can tell you that he originates in Tulsa, Oklahoma. He was brought up in a good Christian family and was for many years a minister and served as the leader of the local Youth for Christ
Should be a great show. Hope you'll participate. At least listen. Tell your friends. Tell your worst enemies about the Atheist Forum. And hope you'll join us again next week here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. Till then, along with Jim Peterson and Joe Reinhardt, I'm Ed Golly reminding you, if the story seems a little too implausible to be true, don't believe it just because somebody wrote it down. They can prove it.
You have been listening to the Atheist Forum. To learn more about Atheists of Florida, visit our website at atheistoflorida.com. Continue the discussion on our website, talk.aof.ngo. And join us again next Friday for another edition of the Atheist Forum here on Tan Talk 1340.
WTAN, Clearwater,
FM 106.1,
WDCF, Dade City, Tampa Bay, WZHR, Zephyr Hills,
FM 104.3.
Listen.
Special report critical Kavanaugh vote. While protesters take to the streets of Washington, the hour has arrived when we anticipate learning a key vote in the confirmation of Brett Kavanaugh to the U.S. Supreme Court. Correspondent Manu Raju is on Capitol Hill, where Senator Susan Collins will be taking to the floor of the Senate to reveal her vote.
It's uncertain if she's going to stick with her initial decision to advance this nomination or if she will join her fellow Republican colleague, Lisa Murkowski, who voted against the nomination and told reporters afterwards that Kavanaugh is, quote, not the right man for the court at this time.
Senator Jeff Flake says he will vote yes. Senator Joe Manchin hasn't said what he will do, and Senator Steve Daines says he'll return to Washington by private jet on his daughter's wedding tomorrow if his vote is needed to confirm Kavanaugh to the High Court. Again, Susan Collins about to announce her vote. I'm Mike Moss. A jury in Chicago has just convicted white police officer Jason Van Dyke